everyone, it's Clarice and I've finally done it. Recently, I finally got around to reading and finishing the entire Percy Jackson and the Olympians series by Rick Riordan, which includes The Lightning Thief, The Sea of Monsters, The Titan's Curse, The Battle of the Labyrinth, and finally, The Last Olympian. In general, my thoughts on these books are definitely positive. I really enjoyed them, and it's really hard to fold them up, so I think I'll just put them down. If for whatever reason you didn't already know, the Percy Jackson series is about a kid named Percy Jackson. And this kid is not doing particularly well in school. He hasn't gone a year without getting kicked out, and he's always felt somewhat off in normal society. Like there was something different about him that he didn't quite figure out yet. And then one day, due to a series of events, he finds out that he's a demigod, which means that everything he learned in this Greek mythology class was true. And not only do all these gods and Olympus exist, but also he's the son of one of them. These books follow Percy and his friends as they go on quests, but all of these quests are actually tied into this whole bigger problem and issue that not only involves them, but the entirety of Olympus and the world. And though I can probably say more about the plot, I'll just leave it at that and leave it for you to find out. I was kind of worried going into this first book just because I had watched the movie. But actually, these books are nothing like the movies. The movies really ruined them. If you didn't like the movies, just know that the books are so much better. Generally, I guess you could say I like everything about these books. First of all, they're really fast-paced and really easy to just read and get lost in. I would just be waiting for my turn at the doctor's, for example, and then realize that I'd read 100 pages. It's just that engrossing and that fast-paced, which you would expect from a middle grade series. But just because it's a middle grade series didn't mean that it's just for middle grade readers, because I'm 19 years old and I still enjoy these books. But that being said, even though I enjoyed them now as a 19-year-old, I feel like I would have been absolutely obsessed with them if I read them when I was younger, which unfortunately I didn't. While I enjoyed this series, I didn't love them, and I think that was mostly attributed to the fact that I'm not the target audience for them necessarily. But another thing I really liked about these books, which should be obvious, is the Greek mythological element of it. I mean, when you learned about Greek mythology in school, I was interested. It was definitely one of the more interesting lessons in English class. But still, these books got me even more interested in them. Whenever they would mention something, I would automatically Google it just because I wanted to know more and learn more about the story behind these characters and these events. Which is weird because I normally don't stop in the middle of the books just to research more about the book. But with these books, I definitely did that. Any book that makes people more interested in researching more, especially on topics that most people may not necessarily be interested in otherwise, is a good book. I also really like the characters. I really like Percy's voice. He was really funny and even snarky at times, which I really appreciated. The type of character I got from the movies was kind of different from this. I really liked that he was less timid in the books than I thought he would be based on the movies. And I didn't even just like Percy. I feel like I like almost all of the characters, and a lot of them developed really well in this series too. Often with middle grade novels, it's easy to just make characters that are really one-dimensional, like this character is evil and these characters are good. But a lot of the characters in these books were more gray, like characters that you would originally think were good or bad wouldn't necessarily turn out to be that way by the end of it. That being said though, I didn't think this series was perfect. I did have a few problems with it, especially this first book. I think the main problem I had with this first book is that I hated Percy's mom, which I don't want to talk about in detail now, but maybe after this non-spoilery section, I'll talk about a couple of things. But out of all of these books, even though on Goodreads I gave all of them 4 stars, I definitely prefer the last 3 to the first 2. I'm not sure if it was just because I watched the movies of the first 2. Even though the movies are totally different, they did spoil some of the bigger reveals in the books, which I think may have taken away from my experience a little bit. But overall, I just don't think they were as engrossing as the last 3 books. I think if I had to order these books in terms of how much I enjoyed them, it would go in reverse chronological order, with the last book being my first favorite and this book being my least favorite. And that's not even set in stone, because for the last 3 books, I think the order of how much I like them could have gone either way, because all of them were really good. It's a big selling point for me to want to get into the series is that I heard that The Last Olympian, the last book in the series, was actually a good ending, because a lot of series have the tendency to have really bad endings, and things like that turned me off to the entire series. So when I heard that The Last Olympian was actually a pretty good and pretty satisfying ending to the series, that's kind of what motivated me the most to read this series. And I really did like this ending. I think it tied up a lot of loose ends, and it ended the arcs of some of these characters so well. But it also left you wanting to read the next series, the Heroes of Olympus series, which I do want to read eventually, but I'm in no rush. It was a pretty epic ending, and I think that's why it was my favorite book in the series, just because I was so happy to actually have a good ending. Overall, I'd like to say that this series is really good, and I see what all the hype is about. It isn't my favorite series by any means, though I think if I read it when I was younger, it probably would have been. And I still very much recommend that you read this series if you haven't yet. I don't normally do spoilery sections to videos. I just thought it was worth mentioning and explaining why I hated Percy's mom so much, especially in the first book. So if you haven't read the first book yet, I suggest you leave. Anyway, the reason that this first book was my least favorite was again because I hated Percy's mom. By the end of this book, that was the only thing I could think. Percy's mom sucks, and I really don't like her. Reasoning behind that is, first of all, I found her so selfish. I don't care if the book tries to make it out that she's such a generous mom and she's such a selfless mom just because she married a dude for his stench so Percy could be safe. I don't care because she's selfish. She was completely aware that by keeping Percy with her all the time, she would put him in danger of death. He wouldn't even be prepared for it because he was never trained for it. All these monsters would come at him and he would never know what to do about it. And he went through all this ADHD and dyslexia without even knowing that nothing was wrong with him and knowing the reason why he was so different just because his mom didn't want to leave him. I mean, by bringing him to Camp Half-Blood, he wouldn't necessarily have to stay there forever. He ended up staying there only every summer and coming back to her every school year. She wouldn't have to leave him completely. And even if she did have to leave him completely, I think that would be the selfless thing to do. The selfless thing to do would be to make sure that your son is safe, even if it means having to let go of him. Keeping him with you, untrained, just waiting for death to arrive at your door, that's not the selfless thing to do. That is the selfish thing to do. And I don't like the way that they treated Gabe. I don't care how terrible of a person Gabe is. Gabe was actually being used this whole time. She married him just so Percy would be safe. And he didn't have any clue. They were essentially using him. And by the end of it all, because he's such a terrible person, and even though he was the whole reason Percy was alive this whole time, they didn't thank him. No, they killed him. They didn't even care that they killed him. They talked about it so nonchalantly, as if it weren't a big deal. Percy's mom is a murderer, you know, and she didn't even care. That's still a human being. He may have been a terrible human being, but I don't care how despicable he was. He didn't deserve to die. Nobody deserves to die despite how terrible they are, except maybe Percy's mom. Just kidding. I don't think I want to talk about much more. I just wanted to rant about Percy's mom. So anyway, that was my review. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you've read this book or if you plan to read this book. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!